Good day everybody, this is Kyle, also known as Alien Dude, here with another review, this time of the Yomikuni Warrior Tachi. In case you're new here, or if you happen to have forgotten, a word about myself first. I'm a sword enthusiast, a novice collector. I'm primarily focused on European medieval swords, but I also appreciate just about all weapons of olden days, like this Tachi. Let me be upfront about this. I am not a martial artist, historical or modern. I have no training in how to use a sword. I'm learning what I can when I can. This review will be about the specific Tachi I received. I bought it direct from Yomikuni, along with another katana I ended up selling. This Tachi might be a good example of Yomikuni's work, or perhaps it's an exceptional one. I don't know because all I can really talk about is the sword that I've handled myself. Keep that in mind during this review. This is my amateur opinion about this specific sword only. Yomikuni is a company based in Longchuan, China. I'm sorry if I butchered that pronunciation, and for further mistakes with Japanese words. Longchuan is one of the primary sources for modern-made swords today, and chances are very good that almost any production katana you see on the market was forged there. There are extremely talented blacksmiths in Longchuan, and plenty of lesser smiths. You can find works of extreme beauty and efficacy forged there, but also some of the cheapest junk blades around. When dealing with buying swords from Longchuan, the reputation of the brand and vendor are absolutely king. By perusing Yomikuni's website, it looks like they got their start forging Chinese blades, and have only recently switched their main focus to Japanese. As of the time of this recording, they only list a few Chinese swords available for purchase, and for a month or so they only had Japanese swords. Their catalog of swords seems to change rapidly, with a few mainstays like the Warrior Tachi, which seem always available. I believe Yomikuni forges the swords after ordering, rather than keeping them in stock. Mine took about 5 weeks from order to shipped. Keep in mind that this was a Tachi and another katana. It's possible only one sword would be faster. Looking at what Yomikuni offers, my assumption is that they are not a simple reseller of stock parts, unlike several other companies out there. They have a good amount of unique items, some of which are quite distinctive. There's not many reviews of this brand out there, that I've found at least. The primary one, and the main reason I bought the Warrior Tachi, was Scalagrim's pretty glowing review of it. I've included a link to his review in the description. I recommend you check it out, as he's definitely more experienced with swords than I am. Before getting into this specific sword, let's talk about Tachi in general first. Remember, I'm not a historian, or even very familiar with Japanese culture and swords. Tachi were the precursor to the katana we're all familiar with. Generally speaking, their blades are a bit longer, oftentimes with more sori, or curve, and the ska, or handle, is usually curved as well. Traditionally, a katana is worn and displayed with the edge facing up, whereas a Tachi, it's with the edge down. With the deeper curve and longer blade, the Tachi was most effective from horseback. And that pretty much wraps up my knowledge about Tachis and their differences from katanas, so let's move on and take a look at the listing for the Warrior Tachi on Yomikuni's website. At the time of recording, it's available for 499 Canadian dollars, about 400 US, although I've seen this price fluctuate quite a bit. Yomikuni also has pretty regular discounts available, and I believe a first-time buyer's discount if you sign up for their newsletter. You can pay an additional 40 Canadian dollars, 32 US, to add a hamon polish. I selected this option. Yomikuni lists the blade as being made from T10 tool steel, which is pretty common for Longchuan Japanese swords. I've heard that Chinese T10 tool steel is basically just 1095, but I'm no metallurgist, and it's pretty much just hearsay. As long as the metal is good enough quality, the heat treat is more important anyway. One more thing, and then we'll get into the parts of the Tachi. I attempted to disassemble the blade, but after removing the makugi, I couldn't get the ska off. I believe what was keeping it together was the metal loop on the kabuto-gane, or pommel butt cap. I tweaked it a bit, and while it's not a full bar going through the blade, there are pegs going deep enough into the ska that I think it was acting as a pin. Removing that piece would require bending the metal on it more than I really wanted to, so I ended up just putting the makugi back in place and giving up on disassembling it. Let's start with that kabuto-gane. Like pretty much all of the koshirai on the Warrior Tachi, it's very pretty. It's made of a cast metal that looks similar to the Tsuba, which is listed as bronze, so it might be bronze, but it might be something else. The decorations are floral and the casting quality is good. There's a lot of detail in here and most of the lines are clean. The end of the Kabuto Gane has a prominent ledge where it ends above the ska, and it is extremely unpleasant for my hands to bump into. Thanks to the intricate details on the Kabuto Gane, it's also very uncomfortable to grip. This felt like a significant problem in my amateur hands, because the ska is fairly smooth overall, causing the hands to slide easily. The ska is metal covered in these nice geometric patterns, broken up by a warrior on horseback wielding a naginata. It seems kind of odd to me that the Tachi's decoration shows a different weapon. There's also two different symbols inlaid near the Tsuba. The shape of the ska feels a bit odd in my hand. It's a flattened elliptical shape, and without the Ito wrap that I'm used to on Japanese swords, it's considerably thinner and a little harder for me to maintain my grip on. There's one Mikugi pinning the ska together, although like I said, I think the ring on the Kabuto Gane is acting like one as well. There's these little floral designs surrounding the Mikugi. Like the Kabuto Gane, these are quite pretty, but that comes at a cost. This is right where my hands grip the blade, and the edges of the floral decorations rub into the palm uncomfortably. Incidentally, one of these floral decorations broke in half as I tapped on the Mikugi. I'm going to need to superglue that back together. The Fuchi is also decorated in floral designs. I feel like I'm repeating myself here, but the edges are again uncomfortable. Bumping into them does not feel good. The same goes for the relatively small Tsuba. It seems to be of the same general casting quality as the rest of the Koshirai, with the same problems. When attempting to disassemble the Tachi, the edges of the Tsuba were so sharp that it was painful to press against it with my thumbs. The two seppas are quite small, you can just make out their edges. I like the copper look for them. The common brass ones you see on most Japanese swords would be kind of bright and garish against all the darker browns on this blade. When I said it looks like Yomikuni is not just reselling stock parts, the one piece that looks like an exception is the habaki. It's not the plain Jane brass habaki most Longchuan katanas use, but I've seen this one available on a lot of Chinese-made katanas, and the casting quality on it, compared to the rest of the Watashi, leads me to believe Yomikuni is using a stock piece here. That said, the fit to the blade is quite well done. Looking at the saya, it's a wood core and then covered in metal. It continues the designs and themes of the ska. We have several inlaid warriors, workers, and what looks like a kusarigama. The koiguchi has the exact same designs as the fuchi, and I kind of wonder if it's the exact same piece. The same goes for the sayajiri. It looks like it's the same piece as the Kabuto Gane, just without the loop. Forgive my ignorance if this is common on Tachis. There's a semegane that notionally is designed to help keep the saya from splitting, but since the entire outside is metal, I think in this case it's just there for decoration. A Tachi uses a different suspension system than a katana, which typically has a kurigata and sageo, which you use to tie to your belt or sash. A Tachi uses ashi, which allows it to hang lower from the belt or sash. I don't know what the material of the ashi is, but it feels better than the cheap cotton you find in a lot of production katana sageos. There's some nice decorative beads and tassels on the end as well. The fit of the blade to the saya is pretty much perfect. There's next to no rattle at all. The blade doesn't fall out when held upside down, even with shaking, and yet it takes very little effort to draw the blade, which is welcome since the Tsuba's sharper edges would not feel good to push against if it required much force. Well done, Yomikuni. That's it for the Koshirai. All told, I think Yomikuni might have been going for an Efu or Hoso style Tachi. From what I understand, these were Tachi worn only by the highest ranking daimyos and officials of the court, and they were generally considered ceremonial mountings rather than combat. That would explain the high degree of decoration and the considerable unpleasantness those decorations add to handling the blade. Unfortunately, it's not described as such, and I feel like, were I doing a score-based review, I'd have to dock a few points just for how uncomfortable handling this Tachi can be. Okay, onto the blade itself. It features what I consider to be an absolutely stunning hamon. It looks reminiscent of smoke curling up from the blade. I don't have another warrior Tachi without the hamon polish to compare it to, but the beauty of this one makes me glad I paid extra for that polish. I will note the hamon kind of fades near both the habaki and kazaki. The bohi, or fuller, runs nearly the full length of the blade, terminating just past the yokote. The lines are very crisp and they're terminated beautifully. The yokote itself is geometric, but the line is not very crisp. The polish is barely different between the kazaki and the rest of the blade, although that's kind of unsurprising at this price point. Kazaki polish is, from what I understand, quite laborious and hence expensive. The blade came very sharp, and the edge is even throughout. Before I talk about cutting, please remember that I'm a complete novice at this. I generally try to focus on controlling the blade more than speed as I'm learning. This keeps me from overswinging, but it also means that sometimes I fail to cut even if my edge alignment is good. Of course, sometimes I fail to cut because my edge alignment was terrible. Failed cuts you see are much more likely to be my fault than the Tachi's. My results cutting with the Warrior Tachi were quite good. While I failed at some cuts on pool noodles, watching them back, it's clear they were caused by my poor form. When I succeeded at cutting, they were nice and clean cuts with pretty much no resistance at all. There was one instance where the Tachi tore through rather than cut cleanly, but again, that was my poor form. Water bottles were easy to cut. I've used the Tachi on them before without filming, and I've had a decent amount of success leaving the bottom of the bottle in place. I just wasn't good enough on the day I filmed. Overall, cutting with the Warrior Tachi is quite easy, with the caveat that my hands were constantly being bit. If it weren't for that problem, this would be an amazingly fun cutter. So, what's the verdict? This is kind of a tough one, because while the blade is excellent, I feel like the Koshirai let it down. Don't get me wrong, they're all beautiful, and this is a visually stunning example of a Tachi. The problem is in actually using it. Even just picking up the Tachi and doing very light dry handling. I'm not talking iaido or anything like that, just turning it around and admiring it. The hands get bit by it. I don't have calloused hands, that's for sure, and I'm sure that would help some, but even still, I think there's considerable room for improvement here. Yomikuni does offer several different models of Tachi, some of them with more traditional Edo-wrapped skaz and what looks like less elaborate koshirai. I imagine they'd be more comfortable to use. Bottom line, is it worth the money? I'm going to hedge my bets here and say it depends. If you're looking for a fully functional sword that is gorgeous, but you don't plan on using it all that much, I think yes, it's worth the money. I love the styling on this Tachi, and it is certainly functional. It can cut well, and if you limit the amount of cutting you do with it, the biting into the hands isn't going to be too bad. But I think this is a bad choice for a workhorse blade. If you want to practice your form and repeat movements a lot, or if you want to do a lot of cutting, I think the fittings are just going to end up being too unpleasant for repeated use. That being said, I don't regret this purchase. I fall more into the former category with this Tachi, very occasional use. I can handle the sharp edges for short sessions, and simply put, I love owning this blade. Alright, that's going to wrap this review up. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed it and would like to see more, please like the video and consider giving me a subscribe. Until next time, AlienTude out.